Good evening, everyone. It is Tuesday night. It is the Dog Tag Diva podcast, and I am happy to welcome Amber with me this evening, my fellow female podcaster on Military Broadcast Radio, my true crime friend. And tonight we are going to be talking about the Idaho 4 murders and the recent updates with Bryan Kohberger pleading guilty and the case around this particular topic. Welcome, Amber. Yeah. Thanks for coming on tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So for anybody who's been living under a rock and is not aware of the story, why don't you just kind of give us a brief synopsis of what this case is about?
Well, brief synopsis is that there was 4 college students in Idaho at the University of Idaho, I believe, and they were murdered. And it took a little while to figure out who did it, but it turned out that it was a student at a neighboring university who was going to school for criminology. And his name is Bryan Kohberger, and he was arrested because of DNA evidence. A very small amount of DNA evidence was found on a knife sheath underneath one of the victims. So,
yeah, and this was back in 2022 that this case occurred. 4 college students, like you mentioned, all roommates living together. Well, 3 of them are roommates, and one of them was the significant other of one of the girls living in the house, and he was staying there that evening.
Correct.
And there were other people who lived in the house, but they weren't there that evening.
Actually, there were 2 other women in the home. I believe one's name was Bethany and the other one's name was Dylan. And I believe it was Bethany who heard stuff going on and heard the dog barking. And then she opened up her door and saw the perpetrator going out of the house. He actually walked right past her. And she even got enough of a look at him to say that he had big bushy eyebrows. So that's definitely one of the things that Bryan Kohberger is known for, is his big bushy eyebrows.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, and this was it was November in Idaho, snow on the ground, cold, and you know, they weren't discovered until later in the morning, but they were murdered during the night, like early morning hours.
Yeah, I believe it was around 4 a.m., somewhere around there, when they were actually murdered. And then the roommates did not call the police until, I believe, 11 a.m. And I think Bethany is the one who saw Bryan Kohberger, or the perpetrator, and after he left, she eventually ran to the other roommate's room, and I believe they slept in the same room until they got up to investigate.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting piece of the case because so 4 people are murdered in the home, and I guess, you know, I would like to think that if I was getting stabbed, I might be screaming and it would be more noise. And I know the 2 girls that were in the home that evening, they were talking about how they were in the home and they had woken up later and they're from the noise, and they were actually texting each other like, do you hear anything?
Yeah.
And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, if the two of you are expressing fear and concern to each other about what's going on, why are you texting each other? Why are you not calling 911 from your room? Like, so that part of the story I found really interesting, and I'm kind of not understanding their thought process in terms of why they didn't call 911 in the moment. They're both afraid. They didn't want to leave their room. So why didn't you call 911 like right away? They're texting, having an entire text conversation with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always been a sticking point for everybody. And then that's where all the conspiracy theories and stuff start flying. But honestly, we never know how we're going to react in any given situation. We could swear all day long that we would do this, this, and this if we were ever presented with the same situation. But when you're actually in it, you hardly ever make the choices that you think you're going to make when there's a serious issue going on.
Yeah, and I think that's totally fair and true. I mean, we're talking about young girls who were scared, and just I just can't imagine four people getting murdered, and unless he was just that good and he surprised them while they were sleeping, and they didn't even like. I mean, I'm hoping they didn't kind of have too much awareness of what was going on. Um, but I mean, I'm sure that rocked that whole community when
Hmm.
this happened.
Yeah, when any murder happens, it usually has a long lasting effect. But when you throw in four students, young people, it's definitely going to have an effect on the whole town. You know, it had an effect on the whole nation, honestly. I mean, everybody was in this case. They wanted to know who did this and why they did this. And unfortunately, now we don't even know why still to this day.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too. I mean, and I don't remember, these were all like young, like they were all like 20, 21-ish, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, I don't think yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah, and
Brian is a little bit older than that, right?
correct, because he already had his, degree and his master's degree. I think he got his master's degree already too, so he was going for his PhD, I believe. And, yeah, so that would make him, quite a bit older. I mean, still probably in his 20s. I don't think he's in his 30s yet.
Yeah, I remember when this case first came out. I'm a little older than those kids than college age, and I can remember when I was young and living away at college, and I was only an hour and a half away from school, and I was home pretty much every weekend or every other weekend because I was close, and I talked to my parents several times a week. I can't imagine what it must have been like for these families to be, their kids being so far away. And in Idaho, of all places, it's something that you almost would imagine happening in LA or New York, like in some big city, and small town in Idaho. Moscow, Idaho, is actually where this school is. If I'm
Yeah.
And so just not some place that you think would be happening. And here we had this horrible tragedy occur in this small town and college town where, they, by documentary that I saw, nice town, everybody talks to each other, knows each other, not some place that you might think something like this would occur.
Yeah, my son, went off to college last year, and, the whole year he was there, this whole year school year, I've just been thinking, "Oh my gosh," it was in Springfield, and so it's a bigger town, and Springfield is already known for all kinds of murders and missing people and stuff like that, and I was just like, "Why do you have to go there?"
Because you picked someplace else. My mom called it the mommy meter. Like I was only allowed to go a certain distance and I was not allowed to go outside the mommy meters.
Well, I tried, but, yeah, it didn't work. He's independent, and he wanted to do his own thing. So yeah, I can't imagine the parents. I watched a documentary. I was actually in the middle of watching it when we got on here, and it's on Prime. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called One Night in Idaho.
Mm.
Oh my goodness. I was crying. I was watching it last night, and my daughter and I were sitting on the couch crying, and then I was watching it right before, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, my eyes are all red." Um, yeah, just listening to the parents tell their story and realizing that these are real human beings who are going through this still today, it breaks my heart. And to see all of the terrible things that they had to endure with online conspiracies and people do some really crazy things. And they were even talking about Reddit right before I got off, and Reddit is crazy.
Yeah, I haven't had too much exposure to Reddit, and we do have 4 young people whose lives were cut short, and 2 of the individuals were dating, and
Mhm.
some of their friends were on the documentary that I watched talking about how they just loved each other and were meant for each other, and we just had 4 people who were just kind of in the prime of their lives, getting ready to start
Mhm.
out and finish school and start their lives, and cut short by some random act of violence.
Mhm.
So what are because I don't pay attention to the conspiracy theories. I try to stay out of that. But what were some of the theories that were kind of floating around regarding this case?
Um, so there was a lot of drug theories. A lot of theories about some of the girls being into drugs or being a drug dealer, things like that. Then you had the theories of the people at the food truck, was it somebody from there? And then I think I even remember a neighbor, you know, people being really suspicious of a neighbor and like ruining his life. And people's lives have really been ruined because of these conspiracy theories. And it reminds me that when I speak about true crime, I want to be mindful of the people who are left behind. Um, the ripple effect on people's lives after something like this is great. And 4 people, and that's 4 people who touched many, many lives, over the course of their life. And even if somebody just had, one moment, one good moment with that person, they're forever going to be immortalized in that person's heart, and it's really rough when you see those conspiracy theories being thrown around and then see the effects that it has on the people that they were about.
Yeah, I think that's really that must have been really tough for those families because, we're talking about 4, young people had their whole lives ahead of them. And, you know, there are, yes, this happened, but the families left behind who have to pick up the pieces and try to figure out how do we go on with our lives. I dropped my, son and daughter off at school to get an education and make something of themselves. And then this happened. And I can't
Mhm.
imagine what, the other families were, all the other kids who were there. Like my instinct as a mom would have been like, I'm going to get my child right now and we're coming home and you're going to community school or whatever it is because you're not
Mhm.
staying up there. And their friends, the 2 young ladies who were in the home while these other 4 individuals were murdered. And then all their friends who knew them, they were all just, it's 3 years later in this documentary with talking to their friends and they're still crying and upset because they miss their friends. And obviously these people had an
Yeah.
impact, a positive impact on those around them. And like you said, trying to pick up the pieces after that is not easy, especially when you're young. I mean, I had when I was in college, two friends passed away at 2 separate times for 2 separate reasons. One died of a in a diabetic coma accidentally, and the other one was killed in a car accident. And I was their age. I mean, like I was in college, and I lost 2 friends, and
Mhm.
it wasn't easy when you're young, and you kind of think you're invincible to a certain extent, and then your friends are there and they're a part of your life. And then all of a sudden they're just kind of ripped away and not there anymore. And so I'm sure it was completely traumatic for even their friends being at that school and having to come to terms with what happened, and still trying to process that loss.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, my little brother died from cancer, and his loss was great, and so I can't even imagine if I had a family member go that way and then have all of the media spotlight and then all of the unknowns. And like you said, I would have pulled my kid out of the school right away. And a lot of people did. I remember right after it happened how they were expected to just come back to class like nothing had happened. And everybody was like, what? No, we're not doing that.
That's not how this works.
Yeah, but they didn't really shut the campus down. I mean, they did for a couple of days, I think, and for the Thanksgiving break. But then after that, they just kind of went on as normal, and then they tore the house down, which I think is wild.
Yeah, very interesting. We're going to take a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to continue to talk more about the Idaho 4 murders.
Yeah.
Still see the spray painted stop sign when I roll down 79. The drag marks behind that mini mart ain't faded after all this time. Every man died from Georgia to California's got a boy with a rebel heart. Stories in every small town scar left by a good old boy taking it way too far. Somebody had to drink too much and crank Hank way too loud. Somebody had to always stand up to the guy with a tendency to run his mouth. The straight pipe Chevy had to run these streets like Bo and Luke in the General Lee. Yeah, somebody had to, and that somebody was me. There's still ruts on Ridge Hill Road, and muddy cans we tossed out the window. String bikini on a limb by a swimming hole. That's a story that'll never be told. Cigarette butts in a busted bottle sitting by that old burn pile. This town was nothing without us, tearing it up every once in a while. Somebody had to drink too much and crank Hank way too loud. Somebody had to always stand up to the guy with a tendency to run his mouth. The straight pipe Chevy had to run these streets like Bo and Luke in the General Lee. Yeah, somebody had to, and that somebody was me. I guess somebody had to get a 4.0 full ride, whole life planned out on track. Somebody had to make a touchdown pass when State front page name written in black. But somebody had to drink too much and crank Hank way too loud. Somebody had to always stand up to the guy with a tendency to run his mouth. The straight pipe Chevy had to run these streets like Bo and Luke in the General Lee. Yeah, somebody had to, and that somebody was me. That somebody was me.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about the Idaho 4 murders. And after these 4 individuals were found murdered, that the campus only shut down for a brief period of time. Did they offer grief counseling to the students?
I'm sure they did. I don't know that for a fact, but
Yeah, I would hope that they did. I mean, I can't even imagine like how everybody would have felt on that campus knowing that this had happened.
Mhm.
I mean, when I was away at school, we had a fire drill one night. We were out till like, I don't know, late at night and we couldn't sleep. We got no sleep because we were outside the back, the dorms all night long. That alone was enough, especially being a nursing student. So I can't imagine something significant like this happening on campus and it not rocking the entire campus and everybody being a little bit on edge, even
Mhm.
still 3 years later.
Yeah.
Um, Now, how long did it take for them to find the suspect, Bryan Kohberger?
I wanna say like a month and a half or a little bit longer than that.
Yeah,
Or at least for him to get arrested.
because they had the big smoking gun for them was that there was the knife that was used to kill these individuals was a K-bar,
Mhm.
which if you're in the military, you know what a K-bar is.
Mhm.
And they found the sheath to said knife, and his DNA was on the sheath. Now, did they ever? I don't think they ever found the knife, though. Correct?
No, they haven't found the knife, and from what I remember, I seem to remember it was his dad's DNA on the sheath.
Interesting.
Isn't that
I
I'm
thought it was I'm pretty sure it was just his because when I was watching the documentary, I found it interesting that, okay, they found his DNA on the sheath, but they haven't found the knife, and all the other evidence they have against him is kind of circumstantial. So I thought it was, okay, really interesting, and that, okay, we're getting ready to go to trial, and then all of a sudden there's a plea deal, and Bryan Kohberger has pleaded guilty to the murders in an effort to take the death penalty off the table. Oh, sorry, my cat's making a cameo appearance this evening, apparently. um, so yeah, so he has pled guilty to the crime so that they take the death penalty off the table.
Mhm.
I know that there is some mixed feelings amongst the family members of the 4 individuals that were murdered. A couple of them are okay with it because they just wanted this done and over with, and the others were upset because they wanted to see this go to trial and hopefully him
Mhm.
get the death penalty because they want him to pay for what he did. And I totally understand that. Um, and I'm not a prosecutor and I'm not a defense attorney. And, you know, is it possible that this deal was made and then they needed to get it done and there wasn't time to inform the family of what was going on and kind of get their opinion on the deal being at hand?
Mhm.
Um, but I certainly understand the frustration on the families, but again, you know, this in the eyes of the law, maybe this was the best option that they had to kind of bring this to closure and save the families from having to sit through a trial. I don't know how I would feel about that, honestly. God forbid I'm never in that situation, but
Mhm.
I would want to see justice, but do I want to sit through a trial and relive that when you're just trying to heal and get through the day to day? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's so usually my husband doesn't chime in on a lot of the true crime cases that I like talk about or whatever cuz he's like over it. He doesn't really care. And so but I remember I was following this case and nobody else like knew about it around me. And so I kept telling everybody about it and I was like, "What do you mean? You didn't hear that 4 college students got killed?" And so I would bounce things off of my husband for a little while, and when Bryan got arrested and I told him what evidence they had on him, he's like, he's not gonna be, convicted of this, and I'm like, "No, right? No." He's like, "Yeah, he's not gonna be convicted of this." Now, my husband has, I guess it's called discernment. Um, he has the ability to look at a situation and know exactly what's gonna happen in any given situation, and I used to think he was judgmental. Now I know that he just is able to I mean, he can literally, like, tell you what's going to happen like 2 or 3 years down the road. And you're like, how in the world?
Did you know that?
Because there was no chance of it ever happening, and he would come to me and tell me these things, and I'd be like, you're judgmental. And then like 2 years later it would happen, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. So when he said that to me, I just kind of clicked that back in my head. I was like, okay, well, he's usually not wrong about things. And then when I saw that he pled guilty and he took the plea deal, I asked him, I was like, why do you think that is? And he's like, well, they probably have, what did he say? They probably have they don't have enough evidence to convict him, and they don't want to put it in front of a jury, or what did he say? I can't remember what he said, but I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, you were right. And I felt like what happened, I feel like what happened is that under one of the girl's fingernails, there was a mixture of 3 unknown male DNAs. Okay. For most people, when you bring up DNA, that's going to automatically seal the deal for somebody, on a jury.
Right.
You're going to think DNA, okay, you can't budge that. There's nothing. Okay. So does the 3 unknown DNAs underneath one of the victim's fingernails trump the microscopic DNA that they found in the button of the sheath? So I don't know. I don't think that the prosecutors could get a conviction. And I think they offered it to him. And I think that Bryan was talked into it, or that he kind of enjoys the whole situation. That's what I think.
Yeah, I was watching one, I don't know if it was one of the trials, not trial, but like one of the hearings. And I'm going to be, he's a bit of an odd duck. Like, so I think that, the evidence, and we could talk a little bit more about that too. But if you look at him and listen to him, you're like, he's not right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you can't convict somebody on the way they look or act, right? So
correct. Absolutely. But I think it would be easy for a jury to be swayed. But not that I think, because usually in these kinds of cases, defense attorneys don't let their clients testify because they don't want them to be cross-examined, because that leaves way too much for, interpret, and leaves the door open for way too many things.
Yeah.
But I'm watching, I was like, he just kind of gave me the creeps. And, interesting that he was studying criminology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was studying under Kathleen Ramsland or something like that. She's a criminologist, a well-known criminologist and author. And so it's pretty interesting because she's the expert on the BTK killer. And do you know who he is?
Yes.
Yeah, he's from Kansas. And that guy is really creepy too. And
that's another really interesting case. Like, led a normal life, but behind the scenes, he was a psychopath.
Yeah, he was even a church elder, and that's how he got caught, because he used the church's computer to send a message to the police. So, and that's another thing. It's like, okay, so all they have technically, really, I mean, they have the DNA in the knife sheath, in the button of the knife sheath, but all the rest really is kind of circumstantial, because yeah, his phone pinged, and yes, his car was around, but other people's phones were pinging in the area, and other people were driving, so I don't know. I think he did it. Of course, I think he did it, but I believe that the prosecution didn't have enough to convict him, and so they offered him the plea deal, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, and that's entirely possible that, they didn't have, enough evidence to make it a slam dunk, and they would have left a
Mhm.
little bit of room for interpretation.
Mhm.
And, and that happens. We've seen that happen, in other cases. There's not a lot of evidence, but people get convicted, and maybe, Bryan didn't want to take the chance of going to, to death row. And so,
Or it
taking
could
the
have been or it could have been a Casey Anthony situation where everybody knew she did it, but she got
right.
off anyways.
Right. Yeah. Oh, please. We should do a show on that one too, because that was BS. And OJ Simpson, he did it. Totally did it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And my daughter actually knows a little bit of behind the scenes information in the Casey Anthony situation. So I'll have to tell you behind the scenes.
Yeah, we'll have to do another show on some other true crime people who got off, who we knew damn well were guilty as hell. But we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, we're gonna continue talking about the Idaho 4 murders and the evidence. And there's my song. There it is.
Dream too big, wanting to grow up way too quick, searching for spotlights since I was 6. Hello, my name is Dream too big. Hello, my name is way too loud. My voice can cut right through the crowd. God make fun of for it, but who's laughing now? Hello, my name is way too loud. I know I've had my moments and I've had heartaches. God is making miracles out of my mistakes. You can say I won't make it, and I can tell you that I don't really care. 'Cause hello, my name is going somewhere. Far. Lost all my words in a mason jar. Locked eyes with a stranger at the end of the bar. Hello, my name is You'll Go Far. Well, hello, my name is One More Try. I put too much stock in bad advice, 'cause anything worth leaving is worth loving twice. You're never gonna leave the ground. You can tell us all about it when you come back around. Hello, my name is Get Knocked Down. Hello, my name is Stand Back Up. Keep moving even when it gets rough. Hello, my name is going
Welcome back. And before the break, we were talking about Bryan Kohberger taking the plea deal of guilty in the murder of 4 college students at the University of Idaho. And before the break, you had mentioned that you think he did it. And where is that feeling coming from? Like not just the evidence, but something else.
So not just the evidence, just all of the stuff I've heard about him, like from past friends. There's an account of him helping one of his friends install video cameras in her house. And then she would come home and things would be moved.
Oh.
And after this, she kind of thought that it was probably him messing around. Yeah, so she thought somebody was coming into her home and moving things and stuff like that. And then there's an account where Bryan was very intrigued by Elliot Rodger. Do you know who he is?
I do not know who he is.
He is a serial killer, mass murderer who was a rich kid who was an incel. An incel is somebody who is a male who can't get girls, but they think they deserve girls.
Oh.
Yeah, one of those guys. And so Elliot Rodger made a whole manifesto and everything. And while Bryan was in class one time, they had to go over Elliot Rodger and his manifesto. And some of the people were saying, you know, that he was very interested in this guy and stuff like that. So, you know, stuff like that, it accumulates over a lot of time. And I even remember hearing accounts of him being at bars and asking women for their numbers at like inappropriate times and stuff like that. Just weird stuff.
And, you know, one of the things that we were talking about before we came on air that was mentioned in the documentary is that 2 of the girls that were in the house, one of them heard the dog barking. One of the roommates owned a dog, and the dog was locked up in another bedroom where there were no people.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the dog is okay for anybody who's asking, because I know I was very concerned about the dog. And I think that's just kind of that piece of it comes from me being a nurse and just kind of seeing the worst in humanity and seeing people get sick and suffer and die. But I can't deal with the animals. So, you know, and so like that, I was watching the whole documentary and I'm listening and hearing about the story and feeling awful for these young, you know, college students who were murdered and their families having to put the pieces together. But the whole time I'm like, where is the dog? Is the dog okay? Because I have to know, because I can't handle this. It'll be the icing on the cake that'll just put me over the edge of this case. It wasn't enough that 4 lives have been cut short and 4 families are devastated. But the dog is okay, and he's been adopted out by one of the family members, and he or she is okay. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
That just I would not be able to handle that.
You know, before we went to break, we were talking about the DNA, and I said,
Yes.
was it his dad's DNA? So what it was is they used genetic genealogy, and his dad's DNA was on a genetic database.
Database,
And
yeah.
so that's how they got him.
Yeah, all these people who were doing like 23andMe or Ancestry DNA, and then they're finding like other people is just wild to me.
Yeah, I did mine. I did Ancestry and 23andMe, and I put mine on GEDmatch because, you know, I have some concerns, you know, and so I just put it out there just in case one of my family members did something that they weren't supposed to do, and I can help solve it. So, yeah.
Taking your passion for true crime to another level.
Yeah, no, so I didn't even watch true crime or anything until I got bedridden and from migraines. I was in bed for 6.5 years, and me a video of Stephanie Harlow, and she was doing her Joseph Mengele series. It was a history series, And I was like, oh, this is really good. So I watched that whole one. And then I went to see her other videos and it was all true crime stuff. And I was like, oh, wow. And so I started watching it and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I didn't watch this when I lived in Florida, or when when my kids were smaller, because I was living in Florida at the time, but my kids were much older. So if my kids had been smaller and I started watching that stuff, I would have never let them out of my sight.
We're homeschooling all the kids, honey.
Well, I did that for a while too.
Wow. God bless you. I don't know how moms and dads are doing the homeschooling thing with their kids, because I got through school and with myself and having to do it with somebody else. And so I hats off to any of you who are doing homeschooling. So back to Bryan, I think, like we said, the evidence, there is some evidence that definitely links him. I think for me, I would like a little bit more stuff that makes it a little bit more of a slam dunk. Like the 4 people were murdered. I would think that his DNA would be on more of the victims, but then again, he studied criminology, and I think that maybe played a part in it. And he cleaned up after himself. But it was Idaho in November, and there was snow on the ground. Like there were no footprints. Like that was one of the things that I was like, well, it was snow on the ground.
Yeah, and then somebody had said, well, he probably put, the whole Tyvek or whatever on the suit, or maybe even booties and stuff like that. But it's like, but still, even then, that stuff would have transferred into the snow.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely had some questions watching the documentary, and if we're having some questions, then I would imagine that a jury probably would have had similar questions or thoughts. I would hope, if you're being objective and listening to all the evidence. But I keep coming back to, well, he took the deal, so if I was innocent, I wouldn't take a deal no matter what. I would say, let's take it to trial because I didn't do this. So I think he did it too. But I'm also, part of that basis comes from he pled guilty, and guilty people don't take deals unless they, innocent people don't take deals.
They do. It has happened quite a bit. People have been badgered into it. I can remember Jesse Miskelly, the guy from the West Memphis 3 case.
Yes.
Yeah, he did that, and there's other ones. And but I'm always going to think a little bit further. And so I remember when Bryan got arrested, when they came into his house and arrested him, he said something like, was anybody else arrested? And that's always stuck with me. Why would he say that? Did he say that to throw them off? Or is there more to the extra DNA underneath the fingernails?
Right. And he's just protecting other people, or just staying quiet because
he could be just one of those guys who really likes this stuff and thinks it's really awesome that he's going to prison. There's some weirdos, because every case people insert themselves. They'll say, I did it,
Right.
And I just had a woman on Saturday. She is a journalist, and she is a journalist in Springfield. And have you heard of the Springfield 3, the 3 missing women from Springfield, Missouri?
I don't know that I've heard about that story.
Okay, well, it's a really big story. You'll have to look it up. But she had somebody call into her radio station when she was a news anchor and confess to killing these women.
Wow.
And but now she doesn't think that he actually did it, because she did run down quite a few things. And from what she understands, he lives in Florida now. And so
great. I'll keep my eye out.
Well, yeah. I lived in a neighborhood in Florida that there was some pretty weird stuff going on.
Yeah, I'm glad I can carry in this state.
Yeah, right. we have it here too. So but Yeah, this case is very interesting, and if you allow yourself to go down the rabbit hole, you can convince yourself of anything.
That's true.
And I mean, for a while I was like, well, maybe he didn't do it, like about a year ago or so. I was like, well, maybe he didn't do it. But now, I really think he did do it. And I don't think that there's anybody else involved. But my conspiracy mind is always going to say, well, he did say, and there is that.
Well, and I think, and you had mentioned this earlier that they have since torn down that house.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that they were talking about in the documentary is that the layout of the house was kind of unique,
Mm-hmm.
and that it was interesting that whoever did this must have had some prior knowledge of the house or something by the way they moved through the house. So that to me really kind of creeped me out.
Yeah, well, it was a party house, and there's officer cam video of officers going to the house when the people who lived in the house weren't even there, and people were just throwing a party. So you have
Wow.
no idea when he would have gone in there. I'm sure he went in there before. I'm sure he walked around and figured out what he was doing.
Yeah, just interesting and a horrible shame to boot. But the house has since been torn down, which I think is probably the right thing to do.
I don't, because
Ooh, do tell.
especially considering the fact that they tore it down before Bryan pled guilty and before he took a plea deal, I think that they definitely should have left it up until his
Okay,
conviction was secure, because there's always going to be a question in a juror's mind where they want to be able to go back and look at the crime scene.
Right.
And
That's fair.
And so they did all the mock-ups, the computer-generated mock-ups and stuff like that. I
But
heard
it
about.
doesn't take the place of what it actually looks like. So yeah, no, on that, I'm going to agree with you. Yes, they probably should have waited until the trial was over, and we've seen it plenty of times where they've taken jurors to the scene of the crime so they could really kind of see and understand. And as somebody who's a visual person, I know that I would appreciate that myself.
Mhm.
Because that computer generated stuff is only good to a certain extent. It doesn't really give you size comparison and orientation in real time, especially in the dark, which it was 4:00 in the morning or so when this crime occurred. So that I'm going to have to agree with you on. Yes, they probably should have waited.
No, because how many times have you looked at an apartment or a house online? You're like, oh man, that looks really nice. And then you show up to it and it looks like a holy hell.
You're like, what? Well, and not only that, but you can't get it's different when, you're there and like, what's the energy and the vibe of the street and it may trigger thoughts in your head of, oh, okay, well, if it was this time of night and in this area, what else? I like, how are there no other camera? Like everybody's got a door cam these days. Like there's no other camera footage.
Yeah, it is weird. I'm wondering if there is some and they just haven't released it.
Yeah.
I'm sure there has to be. There has to be.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if there's not more evidence that they just haven't released to the public, as well, because it's documentaries can only go so far, but I'm sure maybe they were holding on to some things and playing it close to the vest that until it's not out of respect for the families that of this the students that were murdered, so we don't.
Yeah.
We
Well,
don't need
I'll
to let
say,
them know.
I was just gonna say, just from my experience in the Gypsy Rose crime, so the documentaries say one thing, and then you get the court documents, and they say something completely different. So it's like a documentary can spin it however they want to.
Right.
And one thing I forgot to mention is that Bryan Kohberger, before he was arrested, he was watching, and maybe even before the crime, I'm not sure, but I know definitely after or before he was arrested, he was watching videos from Ken Maines on Unsolved No More. It's a YouTube channel here. And he's a cold case detective. And so he did a bunch of videos on Ted Bundy, and that was a big interest of Bryan's, especially living in Washington and everything. And then he also did videos on Bryan Kohberger and the Idaho case, and Bryan was watching them. And so he has now started corresponding with him, asking him why.
Okay.
Yeah, well, so he actually wrote this textbook. It's an actual textbook, and it's Mastering Cold Case Investigations, and he ran a cold case foundation. And actually today he released a video where a guy that he's been corresponding with and speaking to, who was in San Quentin prison for murder, just got out. And he's been taking these cases to that guy, and they've been dissecting them and releasing videos talking about it from a murderer's perspective and from a cold case detective's perspective. It's very interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, a lot of crime cases that we could be dissecting out there. And I think, Ted Bundy was a psychopath, BTK, total psychopath, Jeffrey Dahmer, total psychopath. But, and that's after they got arrested and all these things came out. And maybe now that he's been, kind of pled guilty and he's going to prison, maybe more things will come out about Bryan Kohberger that we haven't previously known. I think, that's kind of what we're used to in these kind of horrific crimes, is that all the stuff comes out and then it's like, oh, well, no, not that it doesn't make it okay in any way, shape, or form, but okay, there were signs and they were kind of missed. So maybe that's all going to come out now that after a little bit of time passes and these families have some time to kind of process this plea deal and kind of get away from the case, kind of let the dust settle.
Yeah, the first person to get a hold of those Freedom of Information Acts on that case, they're gonna unlock a lot of information for us,
right?
Because that's where you find
the conversation after.
Yeah, that's where you find out the real stuff. What really happened, and then you're like, "How did this go unnoticed?"
Yeah, then things kind of become obvious later on. Yeah, and I didn't realize how, I listened to a true crime podcast about Jeffrey Dahmer, and I was like, oh, like there were so many things that, we found out after the fact, that
so many red flags.
Yeah, so many red flags. So many.
Yeah, well, that's what happens. I mean, once you start actually looking at their lives and all of that, it all adds up. Most of the murderers, who are out there murdering, because they're selfish or because they're just psychotic.
I know. It just makes you, some of it is because they grew up like in, bad situations or bad homes. And it just makes me really want to like just tell people, like, just love each other and just be kind to each other and realize your limitations. And I don't know, if you don't want to have kids, don't have kids.
I have an experience where somebody that I knew as a baby, but I know his mom pretty well. He murdered his dad and his little brother.
Wow.
And him and a couple of his friends got together and wanted the life insurance. And so they murdered him and his little brother. And
awful.
It's wild how things can happen. And it's like people, that are regular people that you never would have thought.
Right. Yeah. Just one day they up and snap and it just happens. So, Well, more to come on this case as time goes on. And I pray for the families of the victims that they find some semblance of peace in their lives after this horrible tragedy, and pray for those souls that they are just, resting and looking out for their families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm praying for them, especially after watching this last documentary. It really humanized them a lot more. I try to see the human being in everybody, but sometimes it takes a little bit more for you to unlock that for me.
Right. Agree.
So I'm glad they did it.
Yes. Well, Amber, thank you again for coming on and bringing some true crime into the show. I think we'll definitely have to talk some more about some of the other psychopaths that we have heard about. Unfortunately, you are correct. And some of these other cases that, kind of hit the news, and Lori Vallow is another one that fascinates me. That was wild. I just can't even comprehend.
She's legitimately insane.
Oh yeah, she's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs for sure.
Most definitely. I thought it was just an act at first. No, it's not an act.
No. I mean, and again, I'm somebody who likes to be objective and see both sides of the story. And I watched some of the, when I had time, I would watch some of the court proceedings, and she chose to represent herself. And I was like, oh girl, just sit down. You should have gone with the lawyer.
Yeah, it's kind of like Letitia Stout.
You're crazy for sure. Yeah, it was bad. But yeah, so we could talk about her, Casey Anthony, OJ, BTK. Yeah, so there's a lot of them out there, unfortunately, that we could be having conversations about. So we'll do a whole nother psychopath episode.
Okay, that sounds good. We've done 2 so far, Gypsy Rose
and now the Idaho
Bryan
4.
Kohberger.
So we'll do another one. We'll do a series. Once a month, we'll do a psychopath.
Okay, sounds good.
Just sad that there's even that many out there that we could do that. But thank you again for coming on. Always a pleasure. And for the Dog Tag Diva podcast, I'm here to remind you to greet each day with purpose, passion, and tenacity, and be kind to each other.
Yes, thank you. Have a blessed
Ladies
day,
and
everybody.
gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember,